Hello lovely people, welcome back to my channel. I'm Adebimpe from Style by Binta, and today in this video tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to recreate this beautiful strap romper. It's going to be having a wrap front and it's going to also be as comfortable as you can see. So if you are interested in content like this and you're coming across my video for the first time, I'd like you to please like this video, subscribe to my channel, turn on your notification button so as for you to get notified when I upload new videos. And to all my returning subscribers, I love you guys. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is to draft my pattern. So I'm going to be starting with the back pattern because the front is going to be a wrap. So I'm going to be using this back to cut the front part. So the next thing I did was to place my pattern on fold, just as you can see. And I'm not going to be making provision for a zipper allowance because the back is not going to be having zip. It is rather going to be having elastic at the waistline. The first thing I did was to rule a startup line, which is also going to be the shoulder line. And from there, I started imputing my vertical measurements. So the next thing I did was to impute the bust point. So in this case, I'm working with the bust point of 10.5 inches and the under bust of 14 inches and the waist length of 18 inches. So I went ahead and I marked the points, and also I added ½ inch for joining allowance. So the next thing I did was to rule a straight line across this point, just as you can see. So I went ahead and I labeled the lines, shoulder line, followed by my nipple point line, under bust line, and the waist line. So I rule a straight line on this last line, which is the stitch allowance line. So I'm going to be imputing my measurements, and as you can see here, I'm starting from the shoulder itself, even though it's going to be a strap romper. So the next thing I did was to divide the shoulder to shoulder by 2. In this case, I'm working with 15 inches divided by 2 gave me 7.5. So I make a point there, then I came down from that part by 1 inch and I make a point there also. So I connect with a straight line, just as you can see. So I came to this center front and I measured inward again. I measured 3 inches. This is going to be for the neckline. I'm not going to be using, so it's just for illustration sake. So at the neckline, I came down by 4 inches, just as you can see. So I went ahead and I connected the point at the neckline with the shoulder part, just as you can see. So it's going to be forming a slanted line, just as you can see. I made a curve for the neckline also. So the next thing I did, from this shoulder slope or shoulder slant, I measured 8 inches for the armhole line. So I make a point there and then I rule a straight line on the point. This is also going to be the upper chest line as well as the armhole line. So the next thing I did was to impute the 7.5 inches, which is shoulder to shoulder measurements, on this upper chest line again, for me to get a straight line from the shoulder line down to the upper chest line. So I went ahead, this part is not compulsory, you can just place your ruler and rule a straight line down, but for precision's sake I went ahead and I measured 7.5 also there. I make a point there, so I rule a straight line from the shoulder slants part down to the upper chest line, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to come to this armhole part, then I divided whatever I have there by 2. So in this case it's 8. So I placed my tape on fold to get the midpoint, then I made a point there. So the next thing I did was to rule a straight line on this point. So this line is going to be the new startup line. So I'm going to be coming in from this armhole side in by 3 inches. So I went ahead and I marked 3 inches. You can do 2.5 so that when you stitch it, it's going to be 3 inches eventually by stitching by ½ an inch. So I went ahead and I marked 2.5, just as you can see. I made a point there. So the next thing I did was to cuff it to the armhole side. So I came in with the armhole cuff, and I went ahead and I connect the point to the armhole side, just as you can see. This is the new armhole line. So the next thing I did was to come down from the center back, just as you can see. So I came down by 2 inches and I'm going to be using the armhole cuff also to blend it into my new shoulder line. So this is absolutely optional. You can follow the straight line I initially rule out there as your back line. So it's absolutely okay if you follow that straight line as well, but I just don't want it blunt at the back. So I came down by 2 inches and I connected it just as you can see. So this is what I have. So I'm going to be ruling out the parts that I'm not going to be working with, especially for now. I'm going to be ruling it out just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to input the bust circumference on the upper chest line. So I'm going to be inputting the bust circumference divided by 4 plus 1 inch for ease allowance, then 1 inch for seam allowance at this upper chest line. So I'm working with 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 is going to be giving me 9.5 inches. So I'm going to be adding the ease allowance of 1 inch, then I'm going to be adding 1 inch again for sewing allowance. So the next thing I did was to move to the waistline. I don't need to input this measurement on the bust point itself again because it's going to be loose other parts a bit also. So I went ahead and I went straight to the waistline and I input the waist circumference divided by 4 plus 4 inches for ease allowance plus 1 inch again for stitch allowance. So in this case I'm working with 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 is going to be giving us 8. Then I make a point on the 8, then I had 4 inches to it again. I made a point there, then I had 1 inch to it again, which is for stitch allowance. So the next thing I did was to connect straight from the upper chest line down to the waistline at the side. So I connected the 2 points together. So like this, my back pattern is ready. So as for this upper part, I'm going to be needing it later because it's going to be helping me to get an accurate strap for this romper. So the next thing I did was to cut the pattern itself. So the next thing I did was to fold my fabric right side facing right side and I placed my pattern on it. So at this point, if you're still interested in adding zip to the back, you can still leave out 1.5 inches or 1 inch as the case may be for the zip allowance before you cut it together. But in this case, like I said, there is no need for a zipper allowance because it's a loose fitting romper. So there is going to be elastic at the waist part. So I've already added the excess for ease. Then I'm going to be pinning it down so as to ensure some stability. I went ahead and I cut it out just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to remove my pin and place it on a new fabric folded into 2 as well. So I'm going to ensure that I have the excess of at least 5 inches in front, just as you can see. So placing the fabric in such a way that the center back is going to be positioned in a way that I have at least 5 inches in front of the center back. So the next thing I did was to pin it down just as you can see. So this 5 inches is going to be for the overlap at the front. So the next thing I did was to mark the 5 inches out. So the next thing I did was to cut it out. When I got to the upper part of the armhole, I just did a straight cut through just as you can see. So I went ahead and I removed the pin halfway through. So I went ahead and I make a slanted line just as you can see down to the other edge, from that armhole side down to the other edge of the front piece, just as you can see. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to cut it out. So this is for the overlap. This is the excess of 5 inches. As you can see, it's beneath the pattern now. So I went ahead and I removed the pin at the other edge. So this is my back and this is the front. But before I proceed, I'm going to be flipping it together again, and I'm going to be making a notch from where the 5 inches extra measured at that front part start from. That is where the overlap on each other is going to start from also. So I'm going to be placing the notch on each other, and as you can see, the overlap is already created once you place the notch, the 2 notches on top of each other, just as you can see. So this is my front piece and here is the back piece. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to do the short part. So I'm going to be measuring using the exact waist measurements I have on the back pattern that I created earlier, exactly on the short too, because the short is going to be coming to join the upper part. So this is where the adjustments for a romper or jumpsuit happen. So you can't just do this short part the usual way. You have to add 2 inches extra allowance. On a normal ground, if you wear a top and a short, when you bend down, your top is going to jump up because your spine is already stretching out in that curved manner. So the top you wear is going to jump up. So this 2 inches is for allowance. So if you don't have this 2 inches allowance for ease on that crotch part, anytime you bend down, you are going to feel so uncomfortable because the crotch part is going to get stuck to the V part of your body. So it is important you have these 2 inches. If the person you're working for or yourself is on a plus size, you can even make it 3 inches. So I went ahead and I measured these 2 inches is for ease allowance, and my measurement is going to be starting from there. So whatever measurement I'm imputing henceforth, I'm going to be including these 2 inches, which is just for allowance. So in this case, I'm working with a crotch of 12 inches. So I'm going to be adding these 2 inches back to it, which is going to make 14 inches of crotch. So I went ahead and I make a point there on the 14 inches and I rule a straight line on it as well. So it's either I start my measurements from the 2 inches or from the which is the second line, or from the first line itself. So if I'm starting from the first line, I'm going to be adding the 2 inches to whatever measurements I'm imputing. But if I'm working on this second line, I'm going to be using the exact. This is the hip line, then that is the crotch line. So the next thing I measure was the hip. In this case, I'm working with the hip of 9 inches. So plus the 2 inches is going to be giving me 11 inches. So I make a point there also, then I rule a straight line across the point. So I went ahead and I named the lines. So this 2 inches is for allowance, while the first line is going to be for the waistline, because it's going to be the part that will join straight to the waistline. So the next thing I did was to measure for the full length of the rump. So in this case, I'm going to be working with the length of 37 inches. Then I make a point at this 37 inches. So I added 1 inch for fold allowance to it. Then the next thing I did was to rule a straight line across the point, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to label it also. So that's going to be the M line, or the full length of the romper. Then the last line is the fold allowance. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to come to the waistline, and I'm going to be imputing exactly what I have at the waistline on the upper part, exactly on it. So the circumference for the waist of my client is 32 inches. 32 inches divided by 4 makes 8 inches. So on the 8 inches, I'm going to be making a point. Then I'm going to be adding 4 inches to it for ease allowance. So the only difference is for this short, I'm not going to be adding 1 inch for stitch allowance. I'm going to be adding 1.5 for stitch allowance. The reason why I'm going to be doing 1.5 instead of 1 inch that we have at the upper part is because at the short part there is going to be a crotch line which I am going to be stitching together by half of an inch. So the extra half inch is for joining of the crotch of the two crotch together. So I'm going to be repeating this same measurement at the waistline for the extra 2 inches allowance line. Then so the next thing I did was to impute the same measurements to the hip line and also to the crotch line, just as you can see. So I make a point there, extended my lines, and then I rule a straight line to connect it together. So for the crotch extension, I came out by 1.5 inches, make a point there, then rule a straight line to connect with the new point, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to make the curve. So here is the curve, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to extend my lines the same shorter than what I will be needing. So I went ahead and I extended it like that. So the next thing I did was to measure whatever I have at this crotch lines. I divided by 2. Folding it up, you get the perfect center. In this case, what I have here is 15 inches. Divided by 2 is 7.5. So I make a point there. So I replace the same 7.5 inches on this M line and on the fold line also. I'm going to rule a straight line across this point. So I went ahead and I measured the 7.5 inches on the other side as well. So the next thing I did was to rule a straight line straight to the crotch line. So this is what I have. In case where you don't want the hem of your trouser to be this wide, you can come in by 1 inch at both edge, then shape it to the crotch line or to the hip line. The reason why I'm stopping at the crotch line is because I don't want any reduction at the hip line. So I went ahead and I measured the reduction of 1 inch at both sides, and I'm going to be connecting it to the crotch line at both sides also. So the next thing I did was to come out by 1/4 inch at this hem allowance, then connect it to the full length line. This is just to avoid shortage while turning this hem line up. So I went ahead and I ruled a straight line across the 1/4 inch at both edge, just as you can see. So this is what I have. So I came to the waistline and I came down by 1/2 inch, and I'm going to be blending it to the side of the trouser, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to add my stitch allowance. So I went ahead and I added 1/2 inch for stitch allowance on this pattern also. So I went ahead and I connect the 2 points together, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to cut it out. So this is what I have after cutting it out. So this is the front pattern, and the front pattern is what I'm going to be using for the back pattern as well. Making my adjustments on the fabric itself, I'm also going to be using this front pattern to cut for the back piece on the fabric itself. So the next thing I did was to fold my fabric into two, then I placed this pattern on it to cut for the front piece. So I went ahead and I pinned the pattern down to the fabric, and I'm going to be cutting it out. So the next thing I did, I didn't remove the front piece from the pattern. I just placed it directly like this on a folded fabric again for the back piece. So I'm going to be adding some allowance to the back piece. So at the waist part, I'm going to be coming out by 1 inch. You can do 1.5. You can. So I went ahead and I marked it, and I'll connect the line to the crotch line of the front. Then I'm going to be blending it to the waistline of this pattern itself. So at this point, I like to let you know that you can't add extra to this crotch part for the back piece, because if you add extra, it's not going to fit into the back pattern. As you can see, my pattern is already fitting perfectly to this front piece, just as you can see. The excess I have is just about 1/2 inch on this pattern, which is just for the stitching of the crotch parts together. So if I had like 2 inch like we normally do to this crotch part at this waistline, is going to be extra and is not going to fit in to the upper part. So I went ahead and I blend the crotch extension at the waist part to the side, just as you can see. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to come to the crotch itself, and I'm going to be extending by 1.5 inches, and I marked it at the full length line and also at the hem line part also. So I went ahead and I ruled a straight line to connect the points together. Then I extend the full length line, the crotch line, and the hem line, just as you can see. So from this back crotch extension, I'm going to be blending it to the waistline with a curved line. So this is what I have after blending it out, as you can see. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to cut it out. So I went ahead and I cut it out. So the next thing I did was to separate the pattern from the fabric itself, and this is what I have, and my front and back piece for the short is ready. The adjustment to the initial style itself is the addition of a sleeve. So in this case, I'm going to be drafting a pattern for a sleeve. Placing the pattern itself on fold, I went ahead and I ruled a straight line, which is going to be for the startup line. So just as you draft sleeve for an off-shoulder top or dress, same way we draft a sleeve for a cold shoulder dress or top. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to divide the armhole circumference by 2. In this case, the armhole is 18 inches divided by 2 gives 9. So I'm going to be measuring the 9 inches on the startup line, and I'm going to be adding 1 inch for stitch allowance. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to divide this 9 inches by 2. So the simple way is just to place the tape on fold from that edge, bringing it to the 9 inches. So I press it out and I make a point there, just as you can see. So the next thing I'm going to be doing, coming to the 1 inch allowance part, I'm going to be letting out 4.5 inches. This 4.5 inches is the cutout part from the top itself. So the distance from the shoulder slope there, or the shoulder slant, I measured it. Measuring it out, it gives 4.5 inches. So in this case, the strap is 4.5 inches. So I'm going to be letting out 4.5 inches from the sleeve, and I'm going to be starting my measurement on the 4.5 inches. So I went in to mark 8 inches, which is my armhole depth before. So I went ahead and I ruled a straight line across it, just as you can see. So I went ahead and I measured the length I want. So I make a point there, then I rule a straight line across the point, just as you can see. Here I went ahead and I impute the bicep divided by 2 into this marked out line. So in this case, I'm working with 13 inches. So I went ahead and I divided 13 inches by 2, which gave me 6.5 inches. So I went ahead and I make a point there, and I added 1 inch stitch allowance to it. Then I make a point there also. So at this middle line, which is like the armhole depth line that I created on the sleeve, I replaced the measurements I had at the startup line there also. Then I connected the line to the sleeve part, just as you can see. So I connected it as well on the stitch allowance part also. So the next thing I did was to connect the point at the startup line to this side, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to cut it out. So I went ahead and I cut it out, just as you can see. And so if I'm looking forward to having a smart sleeve, this is what I'm going to be working with. But my client does not want a smart sleeve, so I'm going to be adding the extra of 4 inch to the center of this sleeve that I cut out while cutting it on the fabric itself. So the 4 inches is going to be on fold, which means when you open it's going to be 8 inches. So I'm going to be showing you how to go about it. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to fold my fabric, and in this case I'm working with a 4-fold fabric because I'm cutting for the 2 sleeves at once. So as you can see, I'm going to leave the space of 4 inches at the center of the sleeve. I'm going to be adding 1 inch at this upper part, which is where the elastic is going to be passing through. Then at the hem part, I'm also going to be adding 1 inch, which is for fold allowance, just as you can see. So the next thing I did was to cut it out. So when I got to the side of the sleeve, the next thing I did was to cut a straight cut. I did not shape it like the shape I have on the pattern because it's not a smart sleeve that I'm looking forward to have. So I went ahead from the edge of the sleeve. I just cut a straight cut, just as you can see. So this is what I have, and the sleeve is ready. So this is what I have. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to start with the short part. So I'm going to be stitching at this crotch part, which is the center front and the center back of the shorts. So starting with the front piece, I will work with a side part time. So I'm going to be making use of a bias. So I went ahead and I placed the fabric on the bias side. So I cut it out because I'm using the fabric itself to form the bias. So I already have a very detailed tutorial on how to make a bias tip and how to fix it to your fabric itself. You can check it below. I'm going to be leaving a link to it. So the width of this bias that I'm working with is 1¼ inch. So I'm going to be placing the bias strip on the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm going to be stitching all the way down. This is the easiest method for even a big. So this is what I have. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to fold the remaining part of the bias by ½ inch. Then I will fold it over again, and then I will go and top stitch on it. This is going to be stitched on the right side. So I followed the same process for the other side of the front piece, and this is what I have also. So I overlapped them by the 5 inches notch that I made while cutting the fabric itself. I overlapped them by that 5 inches notch, and I brought the notches together. So I went and I dragged like ½ inch from the edge of this wrap. down just as you can see, and I went ahead and I pinned it down. This half of an inch at this edge at the waist part is just to keep this wrap opening firm. So it is optional, you can do it and you may not do it. So I went ahead and I pinned it down, then I went ahead and I top stitch this part where the overlap is joined together, and I'm going to be cutting the excess of the half of an inch at that waist part. So this is what I have. So the next thing I did was to work on the back piece. So following the same process which I used for the front piece, I went ahead and I stitched the bias from the wrong side of this back piece. So I'm going to be stitching by half of an inch. So this is what I have. So as you can see, I went ahead and I gave it a notch because it is a curved shape we have at this neckline. So I went ahead and I fold by half of an inch, then by another half of an inch. So the next thing I did was to top stitch on it from the right side. So the next thing I did was to join my top part with the short part. So I'm going to be bringing the front piece together, and I'm going to be aligning the center front of the top where the notch is with the crotch line of the center front of the short. So I aligned the two together and I'm going to be stitching it. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to get the center of the back piece. So I'm going to be pulling the edges together and I'm going to be making a notch at the center of the back piece. So this notch, I am going to be aligning it to the crotch, to the back crotch line, and I'm going to be running my stitch through it. The next thing I'm going to be doing is to hold one edge and stitch down my elastic on this initial stitch which I used to join the upper and the lower piece together. That is where I'm going to be stitching this elastic. So I'm going to be doing a reverse stitch at one edge and I'm going to be dragging it to the other edge, top stitching on the elastic itself. So I'm going to be repeating the same process for the back piece as well. I measured the elastic of the exact waist of my client, which is 32 inches, and here I'm having the excess, the leftover of about 9 inches. So you are supposed not to use the exact waist of your client as the elastic. If you do so, it's not going to be firm enough at this waist part. So this is how the romper look now. This is the front piece. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to join the two sides together, facing the fabric itself, right side on right side. So I'm going to be stitching the sides together, ensuring that my waistline align. So this is how the elastic look. So as well, I'm going to be running a stitch around this crotch line to the short leg itself. So the next thing I'm going to be working on is this sleeve. So this is going to be a sort of cold shoulder sleeve. So the first thing I'm going to be doing about the sleeve is to fold by 1/4 of an inch, then by 1/2 of an inch again. Then I'm going to be stitching at the edge. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to use my pin to pass the elastic through this 1/2 of an inch that I had already created, because I needed to gather the excess at this part together. So I went ahead and I stitched on the sides to secure the elastic from losing. So this is what I have. So the next thing I did was to hem the down part of the sleeve, and I'm going to be repeating the same process for the other sleeve. And this is what I have for the two sleeves. So the next thing I did was to stitch the side of my sleeve. So I did the same thing for the two sleeves. Then I'm going to be fixing it to the romper itself. So I went ahead and I laid the hammer parts down, just as you can see. I aligned the side joining of the romper with the side joining of the sleeve, and I'm going to be stitching from that side upwards on both sides. I'm going to be left with a excess of about 2.5 to 3 inches, just as you can see. So this excess is going to be my strap is going to be fixed into eventually. So I'm going to be following this same process to fix the sleeve on the other side of the romper. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to measure the excess I have at the front and at the back after fixing the sleeve. So this is just to know the length of the strap I'm going to be fixing here. So I measured 1 inch from the sleeve in itself. So in this case, 3¼ of an inch. So from this pattern, the part that I cut out, I'm going to be measuring on it also to determine the length of the strap. So I'm going to be continuing the measurement from the 3¼ of an inch on this pattern. So I'm going to be measuring for the front. So I have 8 inches here for the front. Then I'm going to be measuring for the back also, continuing the measurements
from the 8 inches on the pattern again. So I have 12 and quarter of an inch there. So the next thing I'm going to do is to continue from the back sleeve again. So, and I'm going to also be measuring 1 inch over the sleeve joining that is there. So this is what I have. I'm having 15 inches as my total strap measurement. So I went ahead and I cut out the bias of the same length, and I'm going to be folding it on both sides by quarter of an inch, then fold it into two again. Then I'm going to go and give it a good press. And this is the example of what I have. This is what I have as my result. So as you can see, I have my 15 inches measured on the strap. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to fix it to the romper sleeve side itself. So I'm going to be inserting the sleeve side in between this bias. Just as you can see, I'm starting from the front side. So I'm also going to ensure that this bias is starting from 1 inch above the sleeve joining here. So it's not just going to be fixed to the SS alone. So I'm going to pin it down to secure it. Then I'm going to proceed to the back part also. Then I'm going to also insert the sleeve side at the back in between this bias as well, and I'm going to be pinning it down. So this will help you to have your strap neatly laid down and is not going to get twisted in the process. Ahead and run my stitch through this strap, and I'm going to be repeating the same process for the other sleeve also. So the next thing I did was to go down to my short part. So I'm going to be hemming the both legs. So for the belt itself, I'm working with the width of 6 inches by the length of 60 inches. Unfold is going to be 30 inches. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to place right side facing right side, and I'm going to be stitching it from one edge to the other. So I'm also going to be leaving the space of about 3 inches or 2 inches where I'm going to be passing it through to the right side. So for the belt holes, I'm working with the width of 1.5 inches by the length of 4 inches. So I'm going to be folding on both sides by quarter of an inch. So I'm going to be folding what I have left into two again, and I'm going to be stitching the side down. Here is the opening I have after passing the belt itself to the right side, and I'm going to go and stitch it down to close this opening. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to go to the two sides of this romper itself, and I'm going to be measuring. So I'm going to be measuring 1.5 from the waist joining upwards and 1.5 again downwards. So I'm going to be marking it. I'm going to be folding this belt holes, which is of the length of 4 inches by half of an inch at both edge, and I'm going to be fixing it to the 1.5 inches I measured upwards and downwards at the sides of this romper. So I'm going to be top stitching it down to the sides of the romper. I'm going to be following the same process for the two sides. And so like this, we have come to the end of the tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. See you in my next video. Bye.